Chapter 20. Toward the jungles they rode, stopping only when necessary. Odyssean guessed that they made good time, although since none of them had ever been far from Sirm before this insanity, they could judge only by Mindel's recollections. Fortunately, Odyssean's brother proved again that any map shown to him for a short period remained burned in his memory, for landmarks he told them to watch for started to appear. The latest was a squat peak on the horizon, what Mindel said the map's owner had called a volcano. None of them knew such a thing, and when it was explained that this was a place where once burning rock had been shot out of the ground like missiles, the rest had looked at Mindel as if he were mad. He, in turn, only shrugged. Odyssean often looked back, certain that this would be the time when he found the people of Partha hot on their trail. However, of the townsfolk, there was still no sign. The volcano was the last landmark, Mindel went on. It, in fact, lies within the first portion of the jungle. That caused Odyssean to straighten in the saddle. So we're nearing the Tarajan region? No, we have quite a ride still, but at least we have reached the lowlands. Indeed, they had all already noticed a change in the climate. It was warmer and muggier. Odyssean was covered in sweat, and even Achilles and Cerinthia showed signs of the heat. Only Mindel appeared untouched. In fact, he seemed to bask in the change. The two brothers had not yet discussed what was happening to the younger of them, the harsh journey leaving the entire party exhausted each evening. However, as Mindel had indicated, the jungles would immediately offer some respite, even if also some new danger. Odyssean hoped that, once they entered, he might find time to deal with his sibling. The clothes that they had been given in Partha had begun to fray with overuse. However, since they had purposely avoided contact with civilization, there had been no opportunity to find new garments, or at least properly clean their own. Food and water were not a problem, just as Odyssean had hoped. Achilles had supplemented their original supplies with game, and the others had gathered berries. Most of the supplies from Partha were now gone, but in their place was bounty enough to keep them going for 3 days. In the meantime, they continued to gather wherever and whenever possible. The wooded lowlands with which they were so familiar had given away the past 3 days to brush. According to Mindel, whom everyone assumed was correct, tomorrow would see the first hints of jungle vegetation. With that in mind, they made camp just before sunset. Odyssean felt very unprotected, without even a few trees nearby. But the other choices would have been either to retreat back half a day to a small grove, or to ride night and day to reach the jungle. The other seemed just as ill at ease, which helped him not in the least. Aware that all he had believed himself to be had been false, Odyssean knew that he could not help any of his companions should he now be attacked by Lilia or either sect. Fortunately, the night passed peacefully, so much so that for once Odyssean slept until dawn without even once stirring. He rose refreshed, but also angry at Achilles, who had made certain not to disturb him even when it was Odyssean's time to take watch. Ominous clouds covered the sky, but there was no rumbling, nor did the wind pick up. Odyssean eyed their surroundings with some trepidation, yet wondering if the clouds presaged something supernatural. However, their day's journey went so smoothly that, well before the sun fell, they not only reached the edge of the jungle, but, after several anxious minutes' consultation, the party plunged in. The jungle both fascinated and repelled Odyssean. He had never seen such bizarre plants or such lushness. The plant life seemed to be fighting with itself, each species seeking some sort of dominance. "Everything's so green," marveled Cerinthia. Achilles slapped something crawling on his arm, "and so full of bugs. Never seen the likes of that thing. There is more life in 1 square mile of this realm than in 20 surrounding Sarum, Mendel declared. No one asked how he knew, expecting that it was something that he had learned from a passing merchant. Certainly, Mendel's comment struck Odyssean as truth, especially as he swatted a variety of exotic and macabre insects from his own body. He began having great regrets for choosing the jungles in which to hide. Is there a river ahead anywhere? Asked the archer. Mendel gave it a thought. Tomorrow. There should be one by day's end tomorrow. We should still have enough water. The jungle's canopy combined with the clouds to make them feel as if they traveled the entire day in twilight. The horses grew restive, not at all used to such terrain. Their tails constantly slapped back and forth as they did their best to also keep free of vermin. Some of Lilia's story came back to haunt Odyssean, the farther he and his companions rode. She had said that the world had been created by a band of refugees gathered from both sides of a celestial conflict, angels and demons together. Such a fantastic combination of power would definitely explain what he still considered an abrupt change in both climate and landscape. It also reminded Odyssean of just how tremendous the danger was to him and the rest. When it finally grew too dark to rise any further, they simply stopped. Since the past few hours, they had been making their own trail. No easy task. Gathering their horses near them, they ate what food they had, then all but Achilles retired. Odyssean did not go to sleep for quite some time, the jungle continually unsettling in its differences from what he had grown up knowing. Strange creatures called out, insects sang for mates. There seemed more noise now than during the day. There came one moment when something of fairly good size passed within a short distance of their encampment. Achilles, still on guard duty, slipped into the jungle but returned a few minutes later without a word. Still, Odyssean thought that the archer acted a bit unsettled. While the night was cooler than the day, it was still very humid. Odyssean constantly felt damp. His hair clung to his head. The discomfort of the jungle fueled his misery and fears. Once more, he had chosen wrong. He should have kept to the region he knew. At least the familiarity would have given him some respite. By the time the light of another overcast day finally poked through the canopy, everyone was more than ready to move on. At the very least, the thought of reaching the river gave them hope. The river meant fresh water and a chance to see something over their heads other than thick leaves. Again, they constantly swatted at insects. Everyone save Mendel had welts, the denizens of the jungle for some reason not finding his pale flesh to their liking. Odyssean's brother remained warmer dressed than the rest, yet did not suffer as they did. Near midday, the party paused to eat and deal with other necessities. The four shared what water remained. Odyssean insisted that he had to be the last. However, as he raised the shriveled sack to his lips, his eyes strayed to the surrounding jungle, and something thick like a tree that was definitely no tree. He immediately lowered the sack for a better look, only to find no trace of the shape. Cerynthia noticed his reaction. "What is it?" "I thought I saw... I don't know. I thought it was a tree, but..." "But it wasn't?" asked Achilles, his expression unreadable. "Tall and thick of build, was it?" It was enough to verify his suspicion of Odyssean's. "You saw something last night. I thought as much." The archer raised a hand in defense against his friend's words. "Hold on. I saw as much as you, which was little enough. Whatever it is, it's as much part of the jungle as these trees and shrubbery." "Is it stalking us?" Cerynthia asked, looking around. Here, Achilles looked contemplative. "At first I would have said yes, but now, the more I think of it, the more it seems our friend is curious." "Well, that kind of curiosity I don't like," muttered Odyssean. "Do you think that there's more than one?" "I noticed only it. There could be more, but it strikes me as solitary. Like a predator? The hunter grimaced. Their mood more pensive, they quickly mounted and left the area behind. For the rest of the day, the riders kept one eye on the path and the other on thick vegetation. No one saw so much as a trace, but the consensus was that their mysterious companion had not yet abandoned them. When at last they heard the rushing of water, Odysseus greeted the sound with a contradictory mix of relief and suspicion. He was glad to reach this latest landmark, but at the same time, the river was a barrier of sorts. With something now tracking them, Odysseus began to fear that all they had accomplished was willingly riding into another trap. Achilles clearly thought likewise, for as soon as he had dismounted, he said in a low voice, "I'm gonna find a place to cross quickly if need be." On the louder pretense of hunting, he hurried off. Odysseus' eyes looked upon Cyrus's daughter, who, in turn, pensively watched Achilles vanish into the unsettling wilderness. "He'll be fine," the son of Diomedes said somewhat awkwardly, aware that his friend would not be in the situation if not for him. "Isn't that right, Mendeln?" "Yes, he should be." But Mendeln's tone was distracted, which did not help the situation any. He seemed interested in something at the edge of the river, but what it was, Odysseus could not say. Certainly not some huge creature such as he and the archer had noted. The only thing that he generally found in rivers was fish. As they filled their water sacks, Achilles made a swift return. Cerynthia had to visibly hold back from running to him. The blonde hunter smiled with more assurance as he reached the party. "There's a bridge," he announced merrily. "Just a few minutes downstream. Looks worn and there are some planks missing, but the horses should be able to cross it just fine." Odysseus took heart. Without hesitation, he said, "We make camp on the other side then." He received no objections. The four quickly remounted, this time Achilles taking the lead. They followed along the water's edge as the hunter dictated, and very soon sighted the bridge in question. It had been made from elements of the jungle around it. The planks had clearly been harvested from local trees, and undersides still covered in bark. The craftsman had skillfully shaved the other side flat. 3 of the planks were broken or completely gone, but if the party guided their horses on foot, there would be little threat. Strong vines and other long plants had been used to tether the wood together. Some sort of brown substance had also been added in between to keep everything solid. Considering their surroundings, Odysseus thought that the builders had done the best possible. True, the bridge swayed a little under their moving weight, but otherwise held. Once they were over, there was debate as to what to do next. Achilles wanted to remain near the bridge, and Cerynthia seconded this. Odysseus preferred a little more distance from it. Mendeln left the decision to the others. As usual, he seemed lost in thought. The archer finally pointed out that, while Odysseus was rightly concerned about their unseen companion, it was possible that something of a more immediate threat lurked nearby on this side. Conceding this, Odysseus agreed to their remaining near the bridge. They kept their campsite as compact as possible. Huddling close to the animals and one another, only Achilles left the vicinity, necessity forcing him to hunt. When he returned, the relieved greeting he received was more for his safety than the bountiful catch he carried. The 2 creatures that the archer had brought with him were recognizable as reptiles, but none such as any had ever seen. They were huge, nearly 5 feet from the tips of their muzzles to the end of their tails. One looked at the terrifying teeth was enough to let the others know that these were generally predators, not prey. Achilles quickly reassured them. "I was never careless. I assumed that there might be dangers by the river, but also game. I found this pair hiding among some reeds. I don't think that they were prepared for something like me." Odysseus studied them dubiously. "Are you sure that they're worth eating? Some of the best meat I caught back home came from snakes and lizards. These, I suspect, will be like a feast in comparison." The two dead beasts had done what little else had, drawn Mendel's attention. He touched one almost gently. These are young, juvenile. I thought as much myself, Achilles replied. The big ones are probably 3 times the size. To Odysseus he added, these were wet, as if they'd just been swimming. You wanted us to move further away from the bridge and the river. I'd say that was an idea we should still act on. They wasted no time in following the suggestion. Achilles, scouting ahead, located a place he believed far enough from the river reptiles' normal haunts. Even then, Odysseus insisted that they ride a little longer, despite the darkness. Achilles showed him another spot. Finally satisfied, they halted again. While Mendel and Odysseus gathered fuel for the fire, the hunter and Cerynthia began the process of skinning and cooking the meat. Don't stray far from the camp, Odysseus reminded his brother as they left, Mendel's condition worrying him. I will take care. Do the same. While there were plenty of trees, finding viable firewood was not so simple. The plant life had a constant moistness to it. Odysseus picked what he could, cautious in his task, lest some vermin or any animal hiding in the bush took umbrage at his presence. Unfortunately, due to his conditions, Odysseus soon found himself disobeying his own orders to stay close. There was not enough good food nearby. In order to make up for the necessity of searching farther away, Odysseus kept a careful eye on his position relative to the camp. This encouraged him to go yet farther afield, and gradually the pile in his arm grew to something useful. Behind him he heard the rustling of branches. Aware of how far out he had strayed, Odysseus suspected that one of his friends had come in search of him. He turned around and dropped the firewood. The behemoth stood half again as tall as him, and more than twice as wide. At first, Odysseus thought it a demon, for it had a vague resemblance to a man, in that there were 2 arms, a pair of legs, and a head. But beyond that was a creature so bizarre that surely it had not been born to this world. Yet, if a demon, it was a very docile one. In fact, although its face was much more in the shadow of the night, Odysseus could for some reason sense that there was an intelligence there, and that was driven more by the thirst for mayhem and blood. The giant shifted slightly, but not in any manner that caused Odysseus alarm. In that flash of movement, more details became apparent. The entire torso had a rough finish to it that reminded him of nothing less than wood. Indeed, one limb ended not in a hand or paw, but a great thorny club upon whose flat head was etched runes for some sort. The other arm had a hand, but there was also a broad, sharply bent formation that started near the elbow and looked to the human like a living shield. 2 bat-wing horns rose above the head, which was squat and heavily browed. Odysseus could detect no mouth or nose, and the eyes were but deep crevices. The behemoth strode toward him at an oddly leisurely pace, and as it moved, there was not the least sound. Odysseus understood that the rustling he had heard earlier had been purposely meant. The creature had wanted him to be forewarned. Are you the one who followed us?" Odysseus finally asked. The figure did not answer. Instead, with astonishingly graceful movements, it went down on one knee before the human. At that moment, Achilles' voice came from the direction of the camp. "Odysseus, where are you? Odysseus!" His gaze strayed toward the voice. A moment later, the archer appeared. "Am I going to have to keep searching for you every time you stray away from the camp?" Achilles asked cheerfully. Odysseus' eyes widened at such a mundane question in the presence of so astonishing a being as the jungle dweller. He looked to the creature for its reaction, and saw then why Achilles acted the way he did. The behemoth was gone, as if he had never been there. The hunter noticed his tension, and all humor vanished. What is it? It... He... Yes, for some reason, Odyssean knew his visitor had been mailed. Was here. What? That thing tracking us? Achilleus started to ready his bow, but Odyssean quickly put a stop to the action. He means no harm. He knelt there. Before you? Odyssean wanted to deny that, but finally nodded. He knelt before me. The farmer went into quick detail, giving even a cursory description of the creature. And then, when I looked in your direction, he simply vanished. Which means that it was you specifically that he wanted to see, old friend. You. He may have never seen a human like us, that's all. It could have been Mindeln, or you. Since Malik used hers, Cerinthia usually stays near the camp. His companion did not see it that way. There were plenty of chances to view me, especially that first time. Mindeln, too. He wanted to see you, Odyssean. You must face that. And there's no reason. Achilleus turned back toward the camp, but although he moved casually, the bow remained in his grip. Only in your eyes, Odyssean. Only in your eyes. Despite their unusual night visitor having shown no hostility, Odyssean did not rest well. He expected other strange beings to follow in the wake of the first, some of them surely with more sinister intent. Yet, the day came without incident. The party ate what was left of the meat and set out again. How far is Taraj's region now? He asked his brother as they rode. Several days yet, Mindeln replied. Further information that he did not supply with, and Odyssean settled back into the saddle. He was already sick of the jungle and continually sick of himself. Small creatures flittered through the branches, some of them recognizable, others almost as unsettling as the behemoth. However, Odyssean sensed that these were simple animals, not some mysterious intelligent being such as had confronted him. What did the confrontation mean? He refused to believe that Achilleus was right. There was nothing to Odyssean. He was a fraud, a mockery. With such thoughts, he rode through the day and on into the night. They traveled late, it taking Achilleus some time to find a clearing large enough for them to use a place to sleep. Odyssean had no desire to leave the safety of the campsite, but, as ever, the hunt for firewood demanded it of him, and the others. He tried to keep close this time, but the pickings were slight and necessity once more demanded he widened his search. With growing wariness, Odyssean gathered one piece after another. Each moment he expected the giant to confront him, but the closest he had come to an encounter so far was an irate toad the size of his head that leapt out from underneath a dead branch Odyssean had just grabbed. Odyssean returned with his arms full, and his mood as black as the night. He ate sparingly from Achilleus' newest catch, some sort of huge rabbit, then slept fitfully until a hard handshake awoke him. Believing it to be the behemoth, Odyssean jerked back. However, it was only the hunter awakening him for his turn on guard duty. "Easy there," Achilleus muttered. "Are you sure you want to take watch?" "I'd rather be up." "As you like." Odyssean grabbed his sword and walking to the edge of the camp, as was the practice, he kept first watch from one vantage point, then, after a few minutes, quietly went to another. In this way, he also kept more alert. Eventually, however, time did take its toll. When he was certain that he dared not stay on watch any longer, Odyssean sheathed his sword and went to wake Mindeln, who was next. After Mindeln would come Cerinthia, and then Achilleus again if necessary. The three men would have preferred to rotate the night between them, but Cerinthia had insisted, pointing out that she was just as capable as a sword as they were. A piece of training done at the insistence of her late father. Odyssean approached his brother's location, only to find Mindeln not there. That was not uncommon, necessity making its demands whenever it chose. He paused, aware that it could not be too long. But after several minutes, there was still no sign of Mindeln. Odysseus tried to tell himself that it would only be a moment longer, but then that moment passed, and still there was no hint of his brother's return. Odysseus glanced at the ground and made out a single footprint. Not yet wishing to disturb the others, he drew his weapon and started in the direction that the print was pointing. The way was troublesome. He was forced to hack at the branches. Twice Odysseus whispered Mendeln's name, both times to no success. His heart pounding faster, Odysseus doubled his pace. Mendeln had to have come this way. A slight sound from the side made him pause. When it came again, he turned toward it. It might be his brother, but it also might be something more sinister. Or it could be the creature again. Despite the risk, Odysseus pushed on. Mendeln was out here. That was what mattered most. If it was the creature, then perhaps it could even help him. The thought seemed ludicrous, yet Odysseus knew that if he ran into the jungle dweller, he would ask it for aid. From a slightly different direction came more movement. Odysseus froze. A breath later, from yet a third direction, there was a noise. Whatever lurked out here, there was more than one. Images of Morlus swept through his head. Odysseus considered retreating to the camp, but it was already too late. He heard more activity in the jungle, all of it converging on his location. A murky form moved from the trees, then another, and another. Ducking low, Odysseus closed on the nearest. Despite his failures, he had no intention of merely standing still as the fiends slaughtered him and his companions. Even if he could kill but one, it would be some small victory, and all Odysseus could ask for. The black form assisted him by veering his way. As the figure neared, Odysseus noted that the head was unencumbered by the monstrous ram's skull helmet of the temple's infernal minions. Peace warders, then, or perhaps even inquisitors. The Cathedral of Light had been oddly silent all this time, even though Odysseus was certain that they were still interested in him. His adversary was now so near that he could hear the rapid breathing. In fact, had Odysseus not known better, he would have sworn that the warrior sounded uneasy, even a little frightened. Taking some grim pleasure in that, Odysseus maneuvered around the figure. A little more than they would both be in position. The dark form abruptly changed direction again, this time striding directly toward where Odysseus hid. Unwilling to wait any longer, the son of Diomedes leapt at him. What should have been a quick mortal thrust failed utterly, his foe avoiding it by accidentally stumbling to the side. The two men became entangled. Their weapons fell at the same time. Odysseus cursed, knowing that such a loss meant far more to him than it did to the other. He was surrounded by enemy, his one chance to in some small way redeem himself, now all but gone. His fighting became more frantic. By sheer force alone, he managed to end up on top. His hands grappled for the guard's throat. But before Odysseus could make his hope, other hands pulled off of his intended victim. His arms were wrapped behind his back, the area filled with armed figures. Someone brought a torch. It was thrust in his face, no doubt, so that he could be identified for the sake of some high cleric of one of the sects. "'Tis him!" a harsh voice declared. Odysseus expected to be clapped in irons, but instead his arms were released. The figures surrounding him stepped back. And one by one, they went down on their knees, leaving only the torchbearer. The man held the flames close to his own face as he stared at Odysseus. "Praise be, we found you, Holy One," blurted Romus.